Close your eyes. Open your mind. Let the day fall behind you like a shadow fading on the hills. We are leaving the familiar roads now. We are traveling eastward, toward mountains where the air is thinner, where the forests fold over themselves, and where time itself seems to pause in the valleys. This is Transylvania, the land of the Carpathians. Here the ridges rise like the spines of sleeping beasts. Forests of oak and pine climb steep slopes, their crowns weaving a canopy so thick that sunlight touches the soil only in pale threads. Wolves call in the distance, their voices low, mournful and endless. Mist coils through the hollows, soft and silver, clinging to cottages as though reluctant to let go. This is a land where every stone holds memory. Every crossroad carries a story. And every villager knows that the night is not empty. The peasants speak in whispers of the strigoi, the restless dead, spirits who rise from their graves to wander. Some feed on the life of the living, slipping into cottages under the cover of mist. Others appear only as shadows, seen in the corner of the eye but never when looked at directly. It is said that those born with a call, or those who die suddenly and without last rites, are most likely to rise again. And so, the people protect themselves. Garlic hung in doorways. Holy water sprinkled along thresholds. Small iron crosses stitched into clothing. If a child falls sick, it is not only the doctor who is called, but also the priest, the wise woman, and sometimes in secret, the grave digger. For here, graves are never entirely silent. In certain villages, they tell of the moroi, spirits who return not in flesh, but in dream. They sit at the foot of beds, unseen but heavy, pressing down upon sleepers until breath comes short and shallow. Some say it is only the weight of the night. Others say it is hunger that carries itself through walls. The wise keep charms beneath their pillows, sprigs of wormwood, beads of ash, the image of a saint etched onto wood. At the crossroads, where one road cuts another, stories gather like fallen leaves. They say the devil lingers there, for every path is a choice, and every choice is a kind of bargain. To bury a man at a crossroads is to deny him the way back, to confuse his spirit until he cannot trouble the village again. And so, when someone dies wickedly or suddenly, the spade may turn soil not in the churchyard, but at the meeting of roads, where the wind is always restless. And above all these legends, in the high passes of the Carpathians, a single shadow reigns, a figure both man and myth, a name that moves like a whisper on the lips of the villagers, Dracula. He is spoken of in half-phrases, in prayers left unfinished. The old women cross themselves when his name is mentioned. The men, pretending to scoff, still glance toward the forest edge before they laugh. For they know the land has carried him too long to be doubted. They say he was once a prince, stern and merciless, ruling with iron will. His banner flew high. His soldiers feared him as much as they followed him, and his punishments were dreadful. Yet he was not entirely hated. For he defended the land, and to his enemies he was terror itself. But something darker lingered in him, something that death did not undo. The villagers tell of a curse, ancient and patient, that bound him not to the grave, but to the night. He rose again, not as a man, not as a ghost, but as something in between. Flesh that does not warm, eyes that do not soften, hunger that does not cease. They call him voivode still, but with a different reverence. Not ruler, but revenant, not prince, but predator. The peasants whisper that wolves follow him, that bats wheel above his castle, that mists rise where he walks, as though the air itself obeys his will. His presence is not a sudden terror, it is a heaviness, a silence, a breath too close to your ear in the dark. And yet, he is courteous. That is the strangest part. Those who claim to have met him say his voice is low, smooth, deliberate. His words are measured, old-fashioned, as though pulled from another century. He welcomes guests with gestures of respect. He offers food, though he himself does not eat. He offers wine, though he himself does not drink. It is only later, in the quiet hours of the night, that the truth reveals itself. The villagers know the signs. A shadow where none should fall. A mirror that reflects the room but not the figure within it. The faint smell of earth clinging to garments too fine for any peasant soil. And above all, the eyes, dark, deep, drawing the will from those who meet them. He does not rush. He does not rage. Like the Carpathian mountains themselves, he is patient, eternal, waiting. The people live with him as they live with the wolves in the winter. They do not expect to banish him. They only hope to survive him. On certain nights, when the wind sweeps down from the passes, they bar their doors and hang garlic in thick braids. Mothers press charms into their children's hands and whisper prayers twice over. Fires burn low, not for warmth but for warding. And still, sometimes a window shivers, though the shutters are closed. Sometimes a sleeper stirs, though no dream was kind enough to wake them. And in the distance, in the high black silhouette of the mountains, the villagers see it, a castle. Its towers rise against the stars, jagged as teeth. By day, it seems abandoned, a ruin from another age. But by night, a faint light flickers in its highest window, like an eye opening slowly in the dark. That is his dwelling, his fortress, his prison, his throne, Castle Dracula. It is said no man who enters its gates leaves unchanged. Some do not leave at all. And so, when travelers pass through these lands, the villagers warn them. They cross themselves and whisper, "Do not go there." They offer charms of garlic and silver, small crosses carved of wood, prayers in voices trembling with earnestness. But some travelers do go, and among them, one whose name the valley still remembers, Jonathan Harker. Jonathan Harker, a young solicitor's clerk from England, had been sent into these lands on business. To him it was work, a contract, a client, a castle. But to the villagers who watched him pack his bags, he was something more delicate. A lamb, straying toward a shadow they had long since learned not to look at directly. He set out at dawn, when the mists still hung low, wrapping the cottages in veils of silver. The villagers pressed offerings into his hands as he prepared to leave. A sprig of garlic, white and pungent. A cross carved roughly from wood, the edges worn by the hands of many before him. A vial of holy water, stoppered with care. "Keep them with you," they murmured. Their eyes slid toward the mountains, then back to him. "For protection," Jonathan smiled politely. He was a man of law, of papers and contracts, of city streets and iron trains. To him, these were quaint gestures, curiosities of an old superstition. And yet, the hands that pressed them upon him trembled with such sincerity that he could not refuse. He slipped them into his coat pocket, telling himself it was out of respect, though deep within, a small thread of unease tugged at him. The carriage waited, horses stamping, steam curling from their nostrils in the morning chill. The driver crossed himself when Jonathan climbed in, though he tried to make the gesture look like nothing more than brushing at his sleeve. The road began smooth, cutting through valleys where fields lay wide and open. Children chased one another along the lanes. Women hung washing that flapped white against the sky. Men worked the soil with slow, steady patience. But soon the land began to change. The fields gave way to forests, tall and pressing. The road narrowed, the wheels clattering over stones. Hills rose sharp, shadowing the path. The sky itself seemed to lower, clouds hanging thick and grey. At every bend, the driver glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting something to follow. He snapped the reins, urging the horses on. Their hooves struck harder, faster, echoing up the slopes. Jonathan leaned from the window, notebook in hand, eager to record his impressions. He was charmed by the wildness of the land, the sheer depth of the forests, the haunting beauty of the mountains that lifted like black teeth against the horizon. He wrote of the peasants' dress, their bright vests and skirts, their old sad songs sung in minor keys. He wrote of the food they gave him: sour bread, sharp cheese, meat spiced with flavors strange to him but full of warmth. And he wrote, too, of their fear, of the way their eyes darted to the forest's edge as the light began to fade, of the way they whispered among themselves when they thought he could not hear, of the sign of the cross, made not once, but twice, as if once were not enough. The sun slid lower. Shadows stretched long across the valleys. The mountains loomed higher, their peaks shrouded in mist. The road grew steeper, twisting like a serpent between dark slopes. Wolves howled in the distance, at first faint, then nearer, then answering one another across the ridges. The horses shivered, ears flicking, breath coming quick. The driver muttered to them under his breath, words meant as comfort, but carrying more plea than command. The villagers had warned him, travel no further after nightfall. The night is not yours in these mountains. But the driver urged the horses on, desperate to cover as much ground as he could before the last light died. Jonathan watched the sky dim, the colors draining into shadow. The mist thickened, the trees crowded close, their branches clawing overhead. The road became a tunnel of darkness, broken only by the faint glimmer of the moon. And then, at last, as the horses panted and the driver's hands shook on the reins, the carriage jolted to a halt. The driver turned to Jonathan, his eyes wide, his face pale. He pointed to the road ahead, where the forest yawned like a mouth swallowing the path. He shook his head, refusing to go further. "No, no more," he whispered. He thrust the cross into Jonathan's hands once more, pressed his fingers tight around it, and pointed him onward. The forest awaited. The wolves howled. And in the high black silhouette of the mountains, faint and distant, a shape loomed, the jagged towers of a castle rising against the sky. Castle Dracula. The forest closed around Jonathan as he stepped from the carriage. The driver's lantern was already swinging back down the road, the horses trotting as though freed from a weight. Alone, with only the mist and the faint silver of the moon, Jonathan lifted his eyes. There, carved against the sky, loomed the towers of a castle. Jagged, ancient, their stone black as if cut from the mountain itself. It seemed less built than grown, as though the rock had decided of its own will to rear upward into battlements and turrets claiming the horizon. He walked the winding road, each step crunching on gravel that seemed too loud in the silence. The forest whispered around him. Branches creaked. A wolf howled closer than before. He tightened his coat, clutching the wooden cross the villagers had pressed into his hand. The path climbed steeply, hairpin turns curling upward like the coils of a serpent. Mist thickened in the hollows. The castle above grew larger, its windows pale and empty, until at last the road straightened, and he stood before a great iron gate. It swung open at his approach. No hand touched it, no chain rattled. It opened as though it had been waiting. Jonathan stepped into the courtyard. Stone walls rose on all sides, black with age. Towers jagged the sky, Bats wheeled overhead, their wings whispering in frantic circles before vanishing into shadows. The gate closed softly behind him, its iron bars sealing with a weight that made the stones tremble. For a moment the air stilled. Then the great oak door ahead groaned, its hinges crying out after centuries of use. A figure appeared. Tall, thin, dressed in black, with a cloak that fell to the ground like shadow. He moved with a strange stillness, as though gliding rather than walking. His face was pale, his eyes dark and deep, his expression one of grave courtesy. His voice, when he spoke, was low and deliberate, each word carved carefully, as if from older stone. "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, and of your own will." Jonathan bowed, startled but reassured by the formality. He stepped across the threshold. The Count inclined his head, closing the door with a softness that belied the weight of the wood. The hall stretched wide and high, its beams lost in shadow. A fire burned in the great hearth, though its warmth did little to soften the chill that clung to the air. Tapestries hung heavy on the walls. Their colours faded, but their subjects strange. Hunts of creatures, not entirely animal, battles where soldiers fought men with faces half hidden in smoke. The Count gestured for Jonathan to sit at a long oak table where food had been laid: bread, cheese, roasted meat, wine dark as garnet. Jonathan, hungry from his journey, ate gratefully. But when he looked up, he noticed the Count did not eat. Not a morsel, not a sip. "You will pardon me," Dracula said, his pale hands folded with courtly grace. "I have supped already." His eyes never left Jonathan, dark and intent, as though weighing not the man's words, but the man himself. Through the long hours of evening, the Count spoke. His voice was patient, his manner courteous, his questions endless. He asked of England, of its cities, its law, its customs. Jonathan answered, finding comfort in the rhythm of his profession, though his unease deepened as the shadows lengthened. For the castle was vast but empty. No servants appeared. No footsteps echoed in the halls but their own, and though the fire burned, the stones remained cold, as though the warmth had no power here. At last, when the hour grew late, the Count rose. His movement was fluid, almost soundless, his cloak sweeping the floor like mist. "You are weary," he said. "Rest now. My house is yours." He led Jonathan to a chamber where a bed had been prepared. Heavy drapes shut out the night. A crucifix hung above the headboard, though Jonathan could not recall seeing it there when first he entered. He lay down, the fatigue of his journey pressing upon him. Yet sleep did not come easily. The castle was too still, its silence too heavy. From somewhere distant, he thought he heard the howl of wolves, their voices rising like a chorus of lament through the night. And as his eyes closed at last, he thought he heard another sound. A whisper of movement beyond the door, a faint rustle, as of garments sliding across stone. The hush of something waiting, just beyond the threshold. But when he woke, the door was closed. The room was still, and the castle stood silent in the grey light of dawn. The castle, Jonathan soon discovered, was vast beyond measure. Its corridors seemed endless, staircases climbing and descending with no clear design. The walls were hung with faded tapestries, knights with solemn faces, saints with eyes uplifted, battles where the victors were unclear. Dust lay heavy in some places, as though centuries had passed without touch. Yet in others, the stone seemed newly polished, gleaming faintly in the candlelight. But if the castle was vast, it was also empty. Jonathan saw no servants, heard no footsteps in the night but his own. The meals appeared as if by magic, bread still warm, meats roasted, wine poured. Yet never did he see a hand set them down. Never did he hear the sound of dishes carried or cleared. When he asked the Count, the reply came with smooth certainty. "My people, they are not accustomed to strangers. It is better this way." And so Jonathan dined alone. Each night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the Count appeared. Always at twilight, never before. He would glide into the chamber, pale and still, his cloak dark as the shadow of the room. His manner was unfailingly courteous. He bowed with the grace of old nobility, his voice low and careful, his words chosen with precision. He asked endless questions of England, of its customs, its laws, its railways and carriages, its estates and houses. He wanted to know the size of the streets, the hours of business, the names of districts. He pressed Jonathan for detail after detail, his eyes fixed, unblinking, as though each word were a stone he set carefully into place. Jonathan answered, relieved to speak of something familiar, yet troubled by the intensity of his host's attention. And always, the Count himself remained untouched by food or drink. He never lifted a cup, never broke bread, never so much as brushed the crumbs from the table. His pale hands rested lightly on the wood, his long fingers folded, his stillness broken only by speech. By day, the castle was a tomb. The Count was nowhere to be seen. Jonathan roamed the halls alone, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the silence. He found doors locked fast, corridors ending in stone, staircases climbing into darkness. He tried windows, but most opened only onto sheer drops, the cliffs plunging dizzyingly into forests below. Sometimes he thought he heard movement, a door closing softly far away, a whisper of fabric in a corridor just past. But when he turned, the halls were empty. He began to notice strange things. The Count's face, pale and sharp, did not reflect in the mirror of his chamber. The candles bent away from him as though stirred by a draught. And once, as Jonathan shaved by morning light, the Count appeared suddenly at the door. The sight startled Jonathan, and the blade slipped, nicking his skin. A bead of blood welled bright on his chin. The Count's eyes darkened. He moved closer, his hand darting with sudden speed. But then he saw the cross on Jonathan's wall, and he recoiled, his face twisting with something sharp, almost fierce, before smoothing again into courtesy. He murmured an apology and withdrew, but the image of his eyes lingered with Jonathan long after. Nights lengthened. The castle seemed to shift around him, its rooms heavier, its shadows deeper. Jonathan kept his journal close, recording each impression, though his hand sometimes shook as he wrote. He began to dream. Dreams of wolves circling the walls, their eyes glinting. Dreams of wings brushing against the windows, of mists rising from the earth and slipping beneath his door. Dreams of pale figures in the corridors, their mouths moving soundlessly as they passed. And always, the Count's voice, smooth and low, speaking of England. "Tell me," he would say, "of the trains. Do they run by night as by day? Tell me of the river. Does it cut the city cleanly, or does it spread its arms wide? Tell me of the strangers who come. Are they noted, or do they pass unseen?" It was as if he were not simply curious, but planning. Jonathan answered, though unease twisted within him, for in the deep recesses of his heart he began to wonder, was he a guest here, or a prisoner? The doors locked behind him. The windows opened to nothing but abyss. The villagers' warnings echoed in his mind. The cross at his neck felt heavier, and beyond the walls wolves howled, always the wolves. The days blurred into one another. Jonathan marked them in his journal, though the light in the castle made it difficult to know when morning truly arrived, or when dusk truly fell. The air within those walls seemed always dim, as though sunlight itself hesitated at the threshold. He began to see the Count's habits more clearly. The man never ate, never drank, never appeared in daylight. He was always absent at morning and through the afternoon, emerging only when the sky was pale with twilight, when the first star showed itself faintly above the Carpathians. Then he would glide into the room with his same measured courtesy and speak for hours in his low, deliberate voice. Jonathan noticed something else. The Count's hands. Long and pale, the nails curving slightly, more like talons than fingernails. When they gripped the arms of his chair, the wood seemed to resent it. When they brushed the table, the candlelight bent strangely, as if to avoid their shadow. He dared not ask questions. He only answered. Each night, the Count's curiosity grew sharper, narrower. He asked of London in obsessive detail. The number of houses in a single street, the way shadows fell in alleys, the patterns of strangers passing at dusk. He asked about ships, about wharves, about how unnoticed cargo might slip from Doctor Street. Jonathan realized, with a slow tightening in his chest, that these were not idle inquiries. They were plans. The castle itself grew less welcoming. The doors Jonathan had once left open now seemed to close themselves. Windows that promised a view were fastened with iron, unyielding. Corridors he had walked before ended in locked gates. The more he explored, the smaller his world became, until only a handful of chambers remained to him. And then the discovery. One afternoon, restless and uneasy, Jonathan forced a window open and looked down into the courtyard far below. What he saw froze him. The Count was climbing. Not down a staircase, not across a path, but along the sheer wall of the castle itself. His cloak spread wide, his pale hands clinging to stone, as easily as a spider clings to its web. He moved downward, head first, his eyes gleaming faintly in the shadow, his movements steady, unnatural, inhuman. Jonathan gasped, pulling back from the window, his heart hammering. The sight was not possible. No man could climb like that. No man would attempt it. Yet the Count moved with the slow patience of one to whom gravity was a suggestion, not a law. That night, when the Count appeared, Jonathan forced his voice to remain steady. The pale figure bowed, his eyes unreadable, and sat across the table as though nothing had changed. But Jonathan knew. The polite host, the courteous nobleman. He was something else. Something older, something darker, something the villagers' whispers had named long before Jonathan was born. Sleep did not come easily. The castle seemed to breathe around him. He heard whispers in the corridors, the faint rustle of fabric, the sound of footsteps where no one walked. He dreamt of wings brushing his face, of mist curling across his pillow, of a cold breath at his throat. One night he woke to the sound of voices, soft, feminine, melodic, drifting from beyond his chamber door. He rose, drawn toward them, though his heart thudded with fear. In the torchlit corridor he saw them, 3 women, pale and beautiful, their eyes luminous, their lips curved in strange smiles. They moved with a grace that seemed more like drifting than walking. "Come," one whispered, her voice like a lullaby. "Come to us." Jonathan stood frozen. They reached toward him, their hands delicate, their eyes pulling him forward. He felt the strength of his will falter, as though their gaze unraveled it thread by thread. But then the Count appeared. He swept between them like a storm, his cloak billowing, his voice thunderous though it never rose above its measured tone. "This man is mine. Touch him not." The women recoiled, their eyes flashing with hunger, their lips parting in silent protest. But they obeyed, drifting back into shadow. The Count turned his eyes upon Jonathan, and for the first time the courtesy was gone. What remained was possession, cold, unyielding, final. Jonathan knew then what he had only suspected before. He was not a guest, he was a prisoner. And the castle was no home. It was a tomb that had never been emptied. The days that followed blurred into a single unbroken dusk. Jonathan no longer trusted the sun when it slanted through the high, narrow windows. He suspected the light itself was weakened here, filtered through something older than stone. The air never warmed, no matter how brightly the fire burned. The walls never softened. The castle remained what it had always been, a silence carved into the mountain, waiting for those who wandered too close. He walked the halls restlessly, searching for some door unbarred, some passage not yet closed to him. But the doors resisted. The locks groaned when he touched them. The keys, when he found them, turned, but did not open. The windows showed only dizzying drops into forests, where wolves waited, their eyes glinting even by day. Everywhere he felt the presence of the Count, not seen, not heard, yet lingering, the way a shadow lingers when the candle is gone. At night, Dracula appeared again, always with the same courtesy, the same measured bow, the same voice smooth and deliberate. Yet Jonathan noticed the cracks now, a glint of hunger in the dark eyes, a too long pause when Jonathan's pulse quickened at some sound, a hand resting lightly on the table, the nails curving, tapping once, as if marking the rhythm of a heart. And always the questions about England, about ships, about houses, about the streets where a man might walk unseen. Jonathan realized with mounting horror that he was not merely describing his home, he was mapping it for his captor. By day the Count was gone. Jonathan searched his chambers, daring further than he had before. In a wing of the castle, where dust lay heavy and cobwebs draped the corners like veils, he found a door ajar. Inside lay coffins. Rough earth filled their bottoms, and in one, pale as wax, lay the Count himself. Dracula did not look asleep. He looked, paused. His eyes were closed, his hands crossed upon his breast, his body utterly still. Yet Jonathan felt it, the hum of presence, the weight of waiting. The earth in the coffin was dark and rich, as though it had been carried from some ancient ground and placed here as a cradle. Jonathan fled, heart pounding, sealing the door behind him. He did not return. The nights grew longer. The castle whispered louder. He dreamed again of the pale women, their voices soft, their eyes bright with hunger, their hands reaching. He woke with his throat dry, his body cold, his breath short, as though something had lingered at his bedside. One evening, as the Count spoke of London, Jonathan dared to meet his gaze. For a moment, just a moment, he felt himself slipping, drawn into a depth that had no bottom. The world narrowed, darkened, spun. He tore his eyes away, gasping, clutching the cross at his throat. Dracula only smiled faintly, as though amused at the effort. Jonathan knew then what he had resisted admitting. This was no man. This was not life as he understood it. This was the thing the villagers whispered of, the shadow in their prayers, the name spoken only half aloud. Dracula was a creature of the night, a lord of shadows, an immortal hunger bound in flesh, and Jonathan was his prisoner. Desperation crept into his journal. He wrote with trembling hand, "I must escape. I must try, though the walls are high, though the wolves wait. If I remain, I am lost." Each night, as the Count's voice wound on, Jonathan listened with half an ear, the other half straining toward silence, toward some sound of hope, the creak of a door ajar, the whisper of a chance to flee. He began to study the castle's stones, the angles of its towers, the places where ivy crept higher, the narrow ledges that might, in a desperate hour, bear his weight. And outside, the wolves circled, their howls rolling up the cliffs. Not eager, not hurried, only patient, as though they too knew he must one day descend. Jonathan's words falter in the journal. His script becomes hurried, broken, desperate. He writes of ledges, of ropes twisted from bedsheets, of chances measured in breaths. Then the writing stops. Silence takes the page. The castle stands, as it always has, on its cliffs above the forest. The wolves howl, as they always do, circling with patience. The villagers in the valleys speak of a young Englishman who passed their inns and vanished into the mountains. Some say he was taken. Some say he fled. Some say they still hear a foreign voice in their dreams, calling for escape, but fading before dawn. And in the high courtyard of the castle, coffins are loaded onto carts. Heavy, plain, filled with earth dark and rich from the valleys of Transylvania. They are bound with chains, sealed with nails. A ship waits at Varna, its sails trembling against the Black Sea wind. The coffins are lifted aboard. The ship is named the Demeter. Her crew is steady, and her course is set for Whitby, a town on the northeastern coast of England. But even before she leaves the harbour, unease stirs. The sailors cross themselves as the cargo is stowed. The air seems thicker. The gulls wheel farther from the deck, their cries fading. At sea, the unease deepens. The captain notes in his log that the crew whispers of shadows moving below decks. At night, they hear footsteps in the hold, though the hatches are sealed. Men wake from dreams of wings beating against the sails, of pale figures leaning over their hammocks. One by one, the sailors vanish. A man on watch never comes down. Another, sent to check the rigging, is not seen again. The sea takes them, the men say, though the waves are calm. The wind grows restless. The ship creaks and groans as though burdened with something more than wood and sail. The log continues, the captain's hand growing more uneven. We are fewer now. The men grow pale. They speak of a tall figure, cloaked, moving along the deck at night. No man dares confront him. We are gripped by something beyond storm or sickness. Storms rise as they near the English coast. The sea heaves, the wind shrieks through the rigging, and still the ship presses onward, as if driven by a will not its own. At last, the Demeter crashes upon the rocks at Whitby. The townsfolk gather on the shore to see the wreck. The deck is empty. The captain is found lashed to the wheel, his hands stiff, his eyes wide, his crucifix clutched tight against his chest. And from the wreckage, a great black dog leaps ashore, bounding up the steps of the churchyard before vanishing into the night. The coffins are later found. Earth clings to them, rich and dark. They are moved inland, though no one sees who takes them. The villagers whisper of a tall stranger in black, seen walking at dusk among the stones of the abbey ruins. The story begins again, on new soil. But for us, the tale does not follow him there. For our story is not of London, nor of Whitby, nor of England's streets. Our story remains with the rhythm that birthed him, the mountains, the forests, the legends carried in whispers and charms. For Dracula is not simply a man, nor a monster, nor a prince of old wars. He is a rhythm, a presence, an echo of the hunger that lingers wherever the night is deep. In the Carpathians, they still hang garlic in the windows. They still bury the dead with iron and water. They still cross themselves twice at twilight. They do not claim to banish him. They only hope to live alongside the shadow, to pass through it and out again, as one passes through mist. And now, as your eyes grow heavier, as your breath lengthens and softens, you walk those valleys too. You have seen the forests fold themselves into night. You have heard the wolves calling across the ridges. You have stood before the castle, its towers jagged against the sky, and you have felt its silence receive you. You have heard the Count's voice, low and steady. You have felt the weight of his gaze. You have walked his halls and glimpsed the shadows that follow him. But now he fades. The ship is gone, the sea is quiet, the mountains are still. Close your eyes, let the hoofbeats and the wings and the whispers dissolve. Let the mist gather around you, soft and endless. Dracula remains, but only as a rhythm, a heartbeat folded into the night, steady, patient, eternal. You are safe here. You are warm. You are held. Breathe in, the cool of the mountain air. Breathe out, the long exhale of centuries passing. The Count retreats to his coffin. The wolves settle in their dens. The mists curl over the valley like a blanket. Sleep as the Carpathians sleep. Deep, dreaming, remembering. Sleep as the story sleeps, waiting for another night to open its eyes. The castle fades. The forest fades. The night itself carries you. Quiet, quieter. Gone.